Hello, I'm Ciarán Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. As liver fluke is a large risk at the moment, we're joined in this episode by Teagasc researcher Dr. Orla Keane to discuss selecting appropriate treatment for this stage of the season. We discussed the various classes of flukicide available, with Orla explaining what stage of fluke they're suitable to treat and the role others could play later in the season. We discussed the challenge of using combination fluke and roamers as part of routine fluke treatment in adult sheep, and why it's better to use a target flukicide. Orla also discusses the situations where these combination products could be put to better use. We finish up with Orla highlighting the need to use a flukicide that targets immature liver fluke at this point in the season. We start off, however, with Orla giving us a quick recap on the risks the fluke poses and the stages of its development.
This is the time of year that liver fluke can be a problem, and it is a very pathogenic parasite. So it can cause serious disease and even death in sheep if left untreated. So it's definitely one to be watching out for at this time of year.
The type of fluke we're treating at the moment, it's mainly our immature fluke we're looking at.
Yes. So fluke has a seasonal life cycle. So generally, fluke eggs are passed out in the spring. Then over the summer, they infect a mud snail. And then in the autumn, a lot of larvae are released out onto pasture. So it is in the autumn that sheep tend to be at risk from fluke. And so we need to think about what products we use to treat that. So as sheep start picking up the fluke at this time of year, they're picking up the immature fluke. And it will take about 10 to 12 weeks for those fluke to develop into adults. So at this time of year, generally the fluke you want to target are the immature fluke. And that means it's important that you're using a flukicide that targets the immature fluke.
And it's good you raised that point, because it brings us to the crux of this. There's a lot of different flukicides in the market. Specifically, they fall into one of 6 categories. You might just take us through each of those different active ingredients and what stage of fluke they target.
Yes, so there are, as you mentioned, there are 6 different active ingredients on the market, and you can kind of broadly break them into 3 types of flukicide. So the first is triclobendazole. That's the first type. There's only one class in that, and that's the group of flukicides that kill early immature fluke. So they will kill fluke down to 2 weeks of age. So that means from 2 weeks after the sheep are infected, that flukicide should kill the parasites. The next group are the group that contains closantel, nitroxanil, and rifoxanide. And this group will kill immature fluke. So it will kill fluke from roughly about 6-7 weeks of age. So it won't kill down as early as the triclobendazole, but it will kill these immature fluke. And then the third group is the group that kills adult fluke, and that contains oxyclosanide and albendazole. And that group will kill adult fluke only. So these are fluke that have been in the sheep for at least 10 to 12 weeks.
So within that category, so it's basically the first 2 groups we'll be looking at this stage. Your triclobendazole, assuming it still works on your farm, and we'll come to that in a moment, or your closantel and your rifoxanide and your nitroxanil products. They're really the only ones suitable to go back to kill that immature fluke.
Yes, so at this time of year where the sheep are picking up the fluke on pasture, it's generally the immature fluke that are a bigger problem. And so you want to be using one of those products that kills either right down to the early immature or just the immature fluke. So that's something from the triclobendazole, closantel, nitroxanil, or rifoxanide classes.
So just within that group order, like the triclobendazole kills right the way down. Probably one of the most commonly used products in the past. I suppose one of the issues that has developed with that is we have detected some resistance to that in flocks in Ireland already.
Yes, and that is something to be aware of. So because triclobendazole is such an effective product right the way down to fluke that are only 2 weeks of age, it's been used quite extensively in the past. And this means that we do know that there are farms in Ireland on which the fluke are resistant to this flukicide, so that flukicide is not working on those farms, and so they really have to use one of the other options, the closantel, the nitroxanil, or rifoxanide. So it is worth checking if you are using triclobendazole that product is still effective.
And just within them other three, Orla, the nitroxyl product commonly marketed under Teagasc has actually been withdrawn from the market next year, so it reduces that selection a little bit further.
It does reduce our selection, and I suppose it's worth bearing in mind as well that closantel and rifoxanide are quite similar products, and we know that Teagasc is coming off the market. So that does reduce the flukicide options in terms of the flukicides that target the immature fluke.
Again, it highlights the need to be very careful with what we choose and how we use it on the farm. Of the other categories, the oxyclosanide is a slightly different one as well, insofar as it has efficacy against rumen fluke. So in terms of its use and how appropriate it is to be used at this time of year or protecting our product, Orla, why is that one slightly different?
So oxyclosanide is different from all the other flukicides in that it also has efficacy against rumen fluke. So this is the only flukicide we have that has efficacy against rumen fluke. So it's very, very important that we use it carefully, we use it wisely, because we don't want resistance to arise to this product within the rumen fluke, because if it does, we will have no way of controlling rumen fluke. So that's something we have to be aware of. Is that to use oxyclosanide very, very carefully. The other thing to bear in mind is that oxyclosanide, along with albendazole, they only target adult fluke. They don't kill the immature. So they're not a choice of flukicide that you would pick at this time of year in any event. They're the types of flukicide that you would be using in the springtime when you want to kill the adult fluke and to stop the fluke eggs being shed out onto the pasture.
Just another subject on the flukicides, and it's something we've touched on before. We see a lot of combination warmer and flukicides on the market. We see a lot of them being used at this time of the year, and possibly they're not suitable for use at this time of the year. You might just highlight again, Orla, what is the issue with using a combination fluke and warmer at this stage of the season?
Yeah, so people can think, that they're getting great value with the combination because it's got both a wormer and a flukicide in the same product. And so, people feel they're getting two for the price of one. I suppose the biggest problem is that it's not very often that you need to target both fluke and worms at the same time. So when you think about it, fluke is a problem generally this time of year. Your worms tend to be a problem earlier in the season. Also, you've got different categories of animals in which you might want to use these products. So the wormers you're generally using in lambs, but they will develop immunity to the worms, and they generally, your mature ewes don't need treatment for worms. That's not the case with fluke. Sheep don't develop immunity to fluke, and so the ewes will need treatment for flukicide. So for fluke, so you want to only use a product that targets what you're trying to kill. So the combinations have a limited role. They might be useful in lambs at maybe this time of year where both worms and fluke might be a problem depending on the farm that you're on. But, in general, they're not that commonly used. The other case for using them is during maybe quarantine treatment. If you're bringing animals into the farm and you want to use a quarantine dose, they might have a use in that category, in that kind of scenario. But in general, they don't have much utility. And if you're using products when you don't need them, you run the risk of resistance developing. You should only use products when you need them.
I suppose key to that, Orla, even when they are being used in the quarantine program, it's essential that both the warmer and the flukicide are appropriate and effective on your farm.
Absolutely, yeah. And the tricky thing is they should be effective on the farm that the animals are coming in from as well, and you don't necessarily know what that is. And the other thing just to point out as well is that no flukicide has persistent activity. So if you have a combination wormer flukicide that's advertising persistence, that's persistence of the wormer, but not of the flukicide.
So, Orla, just maybe to finish up, the key thing at the moment is know what you're targeting, select a product containing one of the active ingredients that's effective against immature fluke at this stage of the season.
Yes. So this time of year, immature fluke is the problem. That's what you're targeting. And, the ewes are probably the group of animals most at risk. So it's unlikely that you would need to use a combination wormer flukicide on the ewes.
Orla, good having you on. Thanks very much for that information.
Thank you, Ciarán.
Okay, we're going to finish the episode up at this point. Again, as with any dosing product, it's vital we ensure that it's been given correctly and that the equipment we use in dosing guns are calibrated correctly and is given the right amount appropriate to the weight of the sheep we're treating. Also, be very conscious of the withdrawal dates for flukicides. They tend to be longer and warmer, particularly important as the season progresses where culls may be sold off. I have included a link to a very useful reference document on products licensed for the control of parasites in sheep. That's in the description of the podcast, and it might be a useful reference for you to look back on. It explains the different flukicide products that we commonly know on the shelves and what category they fall into. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for any other updates on the sheep program, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Ciarán Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and listen in to any of our episodes.